This is a simple conversational tape with Leighton Wilkie. Leighton is the founder of DoALL Company and probably one of the pioneers in American industry and the system of production and marketing that prevails in our country and the world today. My purpose is to have Leighton tell me his thoughts, his remembrances of his history, and his ideas for our future, both himself and this country. Maybe to start an easy base, Leighton, I'd ask you, could you tell me a little bit about your past, where you were born, and how you...
To answer your question, I was born in Winona, Minnesota, a river town, and I was born in 1900. So I saw the entire development of the sweep of progress of the that part of the Industrial Revolution. And it was good to view it from a little town like Winona, where hundreds of steamboats came in every week. It was a lumber town, so there was lots of activity. And I watched the whole sweep of development of transportation, the railroads coming in after the steamboats, the development of the electric lights and the telephone and the automobile. And I was fascinated with all these developments. I saw the development of the automobile from a one-cylinder brush car that we had all the way through to the present-day development. So Winona was a good launching pad for the experience that I later used in building this.
Did the Ford people have cars in there before you left, or?
Oh, yes.
The automobile was starting to...
Oh, yes. The Model T, of course, was tremendously popular, and I drove that car, several models of it, when I was young. So,
did you take it apart? Like I've got 5 kids, and 3 of them are boys, and I've gone, and they're all getting pretty grown now, but they always have to take cars apart. Mm-hmm. And did you take the Model T apart?
Yes, my father had a garage, so it gave me an opportunity to work on cars. And I remember I had a Saxon, which was a make-up car, about 1915, and it was a compact, or a miniature, small car. And I customized it, made it very special into a racing car. I did a lot of customizing. In fact, I've customized nearly every car that I've ever owned.
Including now, or are you still doing?
Even now. Yeah.
What are you doing? I'll get back to it, but just out of curiosity, what are you doing now?
Well, right now we're experimenting with dual fuel. We installed propane on a van, our shuttle car that goes to the airport and takes me places. It's a very deluxe van, and it will run 350 miles on propane and 350 miles on gasoline. And we're doing extensive research on energy, trying to convert cars to run on hydrogen. What we're working on is the extraction of hydrogen from water chemically. And we have a laboratory.
Is that right?
That, yeah.
That's fascinating. You get excited when you hear of any alternative way to solve the energy crisis, and I'm convinced that American genius is going to do it. But what I was really leading up to is what are the percentages of chance that this might happen? Do you think you're halfway there? Or?
Well, in general, if industry was given free rein and given incentives, and the government would take their hands off of enterprise, private enterprise would solve the alternate energy problem. But with the government restrictions, it's not moving as fast as it should. we're making progress, to answer your question, but how close we are to it, it's still not within grasp. We have a golf cart that runs on hydrogen, and the hydrogen is not stored in a pressure tank, but it's stored in a tank of chemical called hydrides that absorbs the hydrogen and then releases it when we want it. And we've proven that to be a successful method of storing the hydrogen. So we're working on several angles of it, several methods of utilizing hydrogen. So the one, to answer your question, this propane-operated van is just one of our experiments. Now we could put hydrogen under pressure instead of the propane and run it. We do that. We have another Chevrolet Citation, it's called, that has 2 tanks of propane, and along with its gasoline storage, has a range of 1,000 miles. So our serviceman in Texas who needs to go from Houston to Lubbock or some distant place to service a machine can get there without refueling if he's driving on the weekend or something. So we're very conscious of the energy problem.
You were in Winona then for how many years? You were born in 1900, and when did you leave Winona?
Well, I went to college in 1920 at the University of Minnesota.
University of Minnesota.
And then I really never went back to Winona.
I see.
We moved the
What did you study in college?
mechanical engineering and business, business administration.
Did you graduate?
No.
No, I see. And then when you left college, did you go to work for somebody, or?
No. I took a course with Halsey Stewart, bankers in Chicago, investment bankers, to learn about finance. And I was in their training course. But outside of that, I never worked for anybody but myself.
How did you get started in business?
Well, I just feel like I've been in business all my life.
Yeah.
I've been in.
Yeah.
I sold automobiles when I was very young, and did quite well at it. And then in the garage, we had developed a tool that was used to align connecting rods. Every engine has a connecting rod between the crankshaft and the piston. And in the old cars...
Which garage was that? In the garage your father had?
Yeah.
Winona? Okay.
In those days, the automotive engineers didn't design the crankshaft stiff enough so that it would whip around and it would actually twist the connecting rod out of shape. And it was necessary to realign it whenever you overhaul the engine. So this tool, which was a precision gauge, made it possible to realign the connecting rod, the squareness between the bearing and the wrist pin. And it was very useful in our garage, so I decided that other garages could
Buy the tool.
So we make up 50 at a time. And
Was this in early 1920s? Or
this was in 1919.
1919?
And in that year, I sold 11,000 of these gauging tools. The method I used was selling direct from the factory, from where we made them, to where they were used, to the customer. And I did that by putting them in a pickup, Ford pickup, taking it out to the garage in the little towns all through the country, demonstrating how it was to be used, and frequently leaving one of the boxes at the place and collecting the money.
Well, what did they sell for?
$55. In those days, that was
That's an awful lot of money, yeah. And you were 19 and you sold 11,000 of them?
That's right.
That's almost an incredible achievement.
Yeah. We established other dealers to do the same thing. And that method of direct selling, I got the idea from a very large company, the largest company in my hometown, called the J.R. Watkins Company. And they sold house to house and farm to farm.
Vanilla. No,
everything.
No. Yeah,
Soap.
Yeah.
And
they used to come to our farm in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Yeah. Watkins.
Yeah. And that method of direct selling seemed to me the only way to sell. If the manufacturer could bring his product to the consumer, demonstrate it, sell it, without breaking the chain, it was a much more efficient way to merchandise. So that's the system we've been using ever since. That's the system we use today. We take our product in an unbroken chain of control to the customer, demonstrate it, and sell it.
After 1919, and it must have been a stunning, well, I wouldn't say personal crisis, but to be 19 years old, create a product that became a standard, be able to sell 11,000 of them for $55 a piece. What happened to you then? I mean, was it scary, or was it...
No, I knew that the world was just unfolding in a beautiful way, and it was a technological world. And if you understood technology, how the things were put together and how they were made, you couldn't help but make money. So I studied for it, pursued that kind of courses, and just continued what we were doing. I did take some time out. I made some money. I took some time out. I traveled. And,
when did you create your first plant or facility?
Well, it was in 1926 that I moved the machine shop portion of the garage to Minneapolis and set up what I called Continental Machine Specialties Incorporated. And it first engaged in making dies, stamping dies for metal pressings. And that was a job shop business. And I developed a method of making stampings without the usual die. Instead of an expensive die mounted in a punch press, I made a very simple one that was not mounted in the punch press, but instead was shuttled in and out of the punch press between plates with an elaborate shuttle mechanism. I patented that, and I went across the country with movies that we took of the system.
In what year?
Let's see, that was about 1928, 29.
My problem always is that I think our company is growing through unique things happening to it. And the problem is when I come to DoALL, you already thought all the things. And I think I've already known. Tell me about the movies. I got to ask that.
Well, 16 millimeter movies had just come out recently. Bell and Howell had a wonderful camera that everybody wanted to own. And so we knew a little about making home movies. So we took a movie of this whole process, how you make this simple die, how you shuttle it in and out. We would furnish the shuttle system, the shuttle mechanism parts, to anyone who would take a license to use my patent under that system. Well, that would be a very difficult thing to sell by hauling around the equipment and demonstrating it. So instead we brought around a Bell & Howell projector and 2 reels that told the whole secret. And that's the approach we took. We said, we'll give you a license to use this system. If you pay us the fee in advance, we'll show you the movie. And
remarkable. And this was in
yeah.
1926? Or?
Yeah, 27, 28.
We're doing the same thing, and we think it's new. That was Continental Tool and...
Continental Machine Specialties Incorporated. That's where I got my start, really, in making important.
And how did that company grow
Well,
until the time of the Depression, say until 1931, that it obviously prospered?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. That gave me the initial capital to launch a whole line of products, selling these licenses all over the United States and in England, where I had 9 salesmen with the movie projectors. And we had enough capital to start building the DoALL machine, which was...
Where did the word DoALL come from?
Well, we saw the possibilities of using the bandsaw principle for cutting metal, particularly dies, cutting an odd-shaped cutout in a stamping die. We saw the possibilities of the bandsaw idea. Instead of drilling a bunch of holes, a row of holes, and knocking out the slug and then filing it off, which was the previous system, and then filing it with a jig file and or by hand. We saw that if you could use a bandsaw that would cut metal, you could save a tremendous amount of time just in die work. So I made a prototype and developed a method of brazing the open end of the band, make it into a band, after putting one piece through a starting hole, braze it. And at that time, the bandsaw blade available wasn't able to cut very well in metal. It could cut wood. And the machine had to be a rugged machine more so than for wood. So the two had to develop together, the machine
blade
and the blade. For instance, the first blades, wood cutting blades, could cut 23 inches through a 1-inch thick steel plate. So we call it 23 square inches, see.
I guess I don't understand that.
If you had a plate of steel 1 inch thick, we could cut right through it for 23 inches. Then the blade you'd throw away.
I see.
Throw it away. Put another one on. See? Today, we cut 23,000 square inches in the same steel.
Do you synthesize the metal that goes to the blade then? You're constantly upgrading the standard.
Yes.
I see.
In fact, today the teeth, the tips, are a different metal than the backing. We put those tips on. They're tungsten carbide steel or special steel that we weld on.
But what you did then in initially inventing the saw, you made a durable piece of machinery, a saw, that was unique, and a durable blade that went in it that could cut steel without wearing out as fast. Is that right?
That's
basically
right. The two had to come together. Now I haven't answered your question. The word dual was originally spelled D-U-A-L. Dual. It was a dual
machinery and blade?
No.
No, not.
Well, in no sense. It was a dual-purpose machine because I had not only a saw blade on it, but I had a file blade on it. And I had a abrasive blade on it. See, so it was a dual machine. So we developed this blade along with the machine over these many years. And now it's become DoALL instead of DoALL, because way beyond cutting dies, it's used for cutting airplane wings or cutting off huge billets in steel mills, or cutting fine slots in rotors, and infinite variety of metalworking. So.
How in the world did you introduce that new concept and get people to buy it?
I've already told you. We put it on a truck.
Did you use films again?
No. In this case, we put it on a truck, took it out into the shop of the prospect, and demonstrated. The salesman was a demonstrator. He would demonstrate how it would save money. And it was so obvious that they wanted to keep the one they had from the demonstration. So we went across the country, and for instance, the first one we sold was the Woodstock Typewriter Company. I don't know if they're still in existence over at Woodstock. And they just wouldn't let the salesman leave without leaving his sample. And that's...
Did he leave it?
He did.
What did you tell him?
Well, he came back and got another one. We still don't turn down a sale.
Well, I don't either. We hope that's what's happening with our video series. How many employees did you have at the time you invented the...
I think the tool and die operation, making stampings, and the Continental process were all blended together in this Continental machines. I think there were about 65.
65, and that was still in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That was 1926? 20?
No, by this time now, it's 1934, 33 and 34, when we introduced the bandsaw, I'm talking about, when we introduced it, you see.
And it's kind of in the heart of the Depression.
Right.
I, as a young boy, grew up in the Depression, and could we talk a little bit about it? How did you...
Well, when the Depression came, it seemed Minneapolis was harder hit than any part of the country.
Sorry.
We had a governor named Olson, who was very radical, red. And the unions, there were strikes that were giving lots of trouble. And our business was hard hit, making tools and dies, and stampings. So it was at that time that I had already developed this Continental process, we called it, which I licensed. So that came in at an opportune time. We didn't feel the Depression as we would have if we hadn't had that to go out and license, you see. So that occupied all the time up to the time I brought out the DoALL, and by that time business was coming back up, so that a labor-saving tool for industry was timely.
So your customers, the machine shops and so forth, had the funds to purchase a
They were
DoALL?
beginning to come back up, and business was getting better, and yes, and they needed something that was a better tool.
As you organized the company, in let's say 34 to 1940, how did you organize the management of the company? What was your theories in doing that?
Well, I have a formula.
Okay.
It's 3 words.
Okay.
Organize, deputize, and supervise. My feeling is that you can always find people smarter than you are to do a job. If you pick the right people and you give them full authority to run it, and then let them run it without any interference. If they make too big a mistake, you fire them. They're the square peg in a round hole. But that's the theory, the premise we've built our business on. We have 73 stores, for instance. Each has a president and a district manager. inside man and outside man, and they run it. Of course, they have the formula, the organization structure that we give them to follow, but they're franchised, and they run those businesses according to our formula.
You were 40 years old before the war started, and we'll get into the war years. What individual influenced you the most in those first 40 years?
Well, if we had to name one individual, I might say Henry Ford.
Henry Ford?
Yeah.
Did you meet him?
No, I met his sons. His son and the President Henry Ford. I've been down there many times to Dearborn, and I remember one time I was in Dearborn selling the Continental process, and I stayed at the Dearborn Inn, and they were having a sales meeting, and they had their dealers in the little dining room there. It wasn't as big an organization as then, so they had their, maybe not all their dealers, but it was packed full of dealers. And I remember Henry Ford and Edsel, the two of them were up there, giving the story about this new model they were bringing out.
Model A or?
I've forgotten. Yeah. And I like the Ford philosophy. The workers should be very well paid, that there would be, he'd run his business without bankers. We've never had any bankers in our business to own part of it or to finance. It's been a bootstrap operation. We've financed out of our own earnings, yeah. So, to answer your question, in one word, Henry Ford would be the man.
Is there anybody else you can reflect on right now? Or,
well,
or
no.
Comes to mind? No. Okay. After December 7th, 1941, which is always a memorable date in everybody, how did the company change as the war took place?
Well, we were well along with the DoALL by that time. And as we progressed, we improved the capacity, the performance of the metal cutting bandsaw enormously. We brought out many different models of metal cutting bandsaw. We also brought out gauge blocks, very precision master measuring instruments. There was a great shortage of them.
When you said we, who was them? Was it all out of your mind that would create these tools, or did it come from others?
Well, I have two brothers. My brother James, who ran the factory in Minneapolis, and my brother Robert, who worked up there too. He also did some selling at one time. So that's the we. I would initiate what
The conceptual idea?
Yeah. So we produced gauge blocks because there was a shortage. And we made a very fine gauge block. We still do. And they're the supreme court of measurement. So we expanded our measuring instruments greatly. But the gauge blocks were brought out during the war. Also, we brought out a surface grinding machine during the war. And
general terms to describe a surface grinding machine.
Surface grinding is grinding a surface with a grinding wheel to make it absolutely flat. And there was a great need for a precision surface grinder at that time.
Is it an emery wheel?
Yes, carborundum. About the best one at the time was Brown and Sharp's, a very popular surface grinder that every tool room machine shop had. Well, we brought out one that was hydraulically operated, much more rugged, would do a more precision job. And many of the things we brought out have made it possible for many of the products to be produced today that couldn't otherwise have been produced. Airplanes, satellites to the moon, and things in your industry.
In 1940, during the war years, you expanded really your line of products. Is what you did with the gauge blocks and the surface grinders. And at that time, you built Continental machines in Savage.
That's right. It moved to Savage just as the war was winding down. Yeah.
In the period of 1941 to 1945, during the war years, personal reflections, who did you meet, or do you recall instant conversations with the war people or anything like that?
Well, we were busy building our business. During those years, we established our stores. They were established as separate direct selling units.
I didn't realize it was that early. It wasn't that time.
Yes.
Huh?
By 1945, we had a pretty good chain of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had moved to Des Plaines, Illinois, for our administrative headquarters, which is the DoALL company.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to answer your question about the effect of the war. We saw an expanded market. The industry was expanding in all directions and needed better tools.
Was it retooling? Did that kind of create the retooling and of industry and the more automated processes in the 40s, or?
Well, in the 1940s, the industry as a whole climbed to higher levels of precision and had more jobs to do. There were more different kinds of products to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And we simply made better tools to meet that need.
Why did you come to Des Plaines? You were a Winona native and a Minneapolis and then a Savage native, and they had a nice home overlooking the river, I guess, or something. But
it goes back to Governor Olson. He saw that it was intolerable to expand further in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
So when we decided to build a large factory to make saw blade, we put it in Des Plaines, and that was 1939.
I see. And the whole DoALL concept then took place, or began to develop and emerge in the 40s, where there was stores throughout the United States and now the world. Is that when it began to?
Well, we were selling direct long before that, and we had what amounted to stores before we incorporated them. For instance, our man in Philadelphia was our man. We paid him, and he went out and sold on commission, and we established his territory. And in order to have bandsaw blade for his customers, he kept a stock of it in his garage. And we saw that wasn't the way to do it, so we established very early a place of business. And the formula for that was that these stores, which are now called industrial supply centers, had to be on the ground floor, preferably a corner, in the center of an industrial region, in an industrial city. And that's the formula we followed.
I see. How do you get people to run these companies?
Well, we picked someone that's talented in that direction, that has some background of industrial equipment, that understands a machine shop, understands what a lathe is, who can also sell, and that's a hard combination to find.
Yeah.
We frequently have to train them, either start with a good mechanic and make a salesman out of him, or start with a good salesman and make a engineer out of him. And that takes some doing.
Integrated training process.
Yeah.
When did you move to Des Plaines in as a family?
Well, actually, it was before that, because I was using this as a base during the years I was selling the Continental process. So it was at an early time.
I see. So this has always kind of been home almost?
Yes.
Realistic, yeah.
When I got married in 1935, I bought a farm 14 miles north of Des Plaines, and I operated it as a dairy farm for 30 years.
I didn't know that. Did you marry a Minneapolis girl or a Des Plaines girl?
Neither. My wife was from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, how'd you meet?
Well, she was going to the University of Arizona. And in 1927, I was making a barnstorming trip with my friend Max Conrad, the late Max Conrad, who was a famous pilot of Little Planes. He holds many records of...
I think I've heard that name.
Yeah.
But
So we landed in Tucson, and that's where I met Miss Wilkie. She was still in school.
Sakes, that's interesting. Did you fly around with Max?
Somewhat, yeah.
Did you? How in the world did you get associated with him?
Well, I went to high school with him in Winona, Minnesota.
I see. I see. What would you say is the most radical change that you've made in the company during its history? It would be one thing.
Well, it's been a steady growth, very steady up growth. Most radical changes is after I stepped down from the leadership and my son Michael took over, and then it zoomed up this way.
What does that mean?
It means that he's put out more stores, more new products. We now sell many more products that we don't make than those we do make. We sell lathes, milling machines, cutter grinders, all of which he lined up as, we're now merchants more than, or as much as we are manufacturers.
Are you still creating new ones, though?
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
yes, you have to do that. That's constant in all divisions.
I'm going a little fast here. I wanted to, during the 50s, what happened to you and the company? Significant remembrances?
During the 50s, I think of one thing. In 1950, we went to Africa on a stopover for 30 days, up around the world trip, and I took my kids. Michael was 9, and my daughter was 12, and we photographed, and we shot 75 big animals that are now in a museum in Iowa.
For heaven's sake.
And so by that time, the business had been so well delegated and deputized and supervised that I could get away.
Was that kind of the first time in the 50s that you felt you could leave it with the people in charge?
Well, it was a gradual development of this basic idea that if you let people have the reins and pick good people, they can do a pretty good job.
I met and I was hoping he was going to be here today, but I guess he fell off a ladder and broke his leg or something. A fellow just had a real sparkle in his eye, Mr. Weber.
Oh yeah, it's too bad he's not.
Oh, I was just charmed by being near him for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about Mr. Weber.
Well, he's a brilliant accountant, a fine gentleman. He used to work for the firm of Ernst & Ernst Accountants. And when I was running my dairy farm, it was about 1940 or earlier, I had him come out there to see we were running it accounting-wise right. He also did the auditing for our companies. And there was another man from Ernst & Ernst named Lee Schoner. So I knew that with Uncle Sam in Washington taking half of what we make in cash, that we had a pretty important partner. And we had to see that he got taken care of, but not too well taken care of. So I saw the importance of having top accountants and financial controllers. So I went to Ernst & Ernst and I said, I would like to hire these two men from you. If you'll let me hire them, we'll give you our business for forever after. And they did. And we do.
And so Mr. Weber joined you with the at the 1940.
Yeah, about that. I'm not sure the date. Maybe it was 1939.
He's pretty much had the financial responsibilities for the affairs.
Entirely.
Entirely.
Yeah.
I see. Is he retired now?
No.
He's still going. For heaven's sakes.
We bring checks over to the hospital for him to sell. Yesterday he said to me, "How much collections came in?" We have a hard time with collections right at the moment. We got about 17 million in accounts receivable. And he's staying awake nights worrying about.
I'm going to jump ahead for a minute because it's in my mind, but when we were here, it seemed to me that Michael was able, in a very short period of time, as we were talking about you folks distributing the Machine Tech series, to surround us with a whole variety of people in different entities. And concluding the discussion, we met in the committee room upstairs. And it was kind of a nice feeling. Somehow the company has I'm not saying this well, it has a discharge of ideas that centers on a focal point very well. Was that by design, or did it just happen?
I think it goes back to that formula.
Was it?
Everyone knows here that he's his own boss, and he does his job to the best of his ability because he knows he's his own boss. Nobody's going to come in and look over his shoulder as long as he does his job. And there's a nice atmosphere that has been created. It's each one of these is a small business and quite different than a large business in operation. We don't have to go to any shareholders because we don't have any except ourselves for a confirmation of a decision. We don't have to go to a board of directors because they're us.
Yeah. Sure.
And so we can make a decision in the morning, and the afternoon it's done.
What happened in the 1960s in the development? Your son began to mature, and other people around you.
I was very lucky. Mike studied every phase of the business. And he went out selling. He had a territory. He worked in the shop. And he learned the business because he knew that this was the business he was going to be in. He studied in school, specialized in finance. That was his major. And he's gradually taken over. Does a fabulous job. Everybody respects him. He's a terrific executive.
Besides the company in the 1960s, was there anything you can recall that was significant or interesting to observe on? Or
we felt that that there was a great vacuum, great ignorance on the part of the public on how the economy works, how we live in this machine age, and that was a very great deterrent to progress. But it's extremely important in a democracy, in any place, for the public to understand the building blocks of production. So we've, from the beginning, have undertaken to put out educational efforts to sell the philosophy of improved tools, not just the tool itself. For instance, we have experienced going into a plant, putting in a labor-saving machine, and the steward goes to the union head and says, "Look, they're putting this, is going to throw 3 men out of work." When the word comes back down, "Don't let them buy it. We can't have that." That actually happened. That's still going on, but less so. And we think we can take a lot of credit for changing the attitude in things we've produced, museum exhibits we've had, selling this idea that tools that are labor saving do not put people out of work, but instead give employment. The story is told about the beginning of sabotage, the word sabotage. In France, a factory put in a number of labor-saving machines, and sure enough, it threw people out of work. So the workers came in with their wooden shoes, or sabots, and threw them in the machines to destroy them. That's the beginning of the word sabotage.
Yeah.
So that's still going on. I mean, even the paper yesterday told about some movements in some unions that are saying, now that we're going to have some unemployment, maybe we better not buy any more labor-saving machinery. They don't call it labor-saving machinery anymore. But anything that improves, the new word is productivity.
Yeah.
And we have a slogan, we are the productivity people. That's our slogan.
I saw that outside.
This area of education has taken many forms. We have a museum exhibit at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry called Civilization Through Tools. We published a book on economics called The Principles of American Prosperity. We produced charts that diagram economics.
Do you find it hard to get people to listen to you?
Oh, of course. Oh, yes. It's hard. Economics is supposed to be the dullest subject.
Yeah.
We've tried to make it, to dramatize it, to make pictures of it with some success.
Outside the company and the family, what would interest you most?
Well, my business is my first love, of course. But I have an avocation of anthropology, of all things. Anthropology, covering the whole span of the evolution of man from the time that our pre-ancestors, our first ancestors, stood upright, used these hands to grasp a thing, a tool. With the opposed thumb and the grip, they could grasp something. And that act changed that being from a lower form of animal into a man. And that's the difference between all other animals and man, is that we are two-using beings. We added a fourth dimension to our thinking. All other animals have a three-dimensional existence. We have a fourth, that thing is a fourth dimension, which is now extended to the moon. And so anthropology is a pretty important subject for a tool maker, for tool builders, because we build these things extended now to produce.
How far back does that go? How far have you traced it back?
Well, I've followed in the footsteps of the eminent scientists who traced it back. And actually we financed people like Louis Leakey and Raymond Dart in their African explorations to trace back to that first man, his tools. We have a collection of them, those first tools.
I kind of look forward to the future of my little company and my family and their opportunities of the country and the things that can be done. I'd kind of like to have you react to that.
I'm an optimist. I think the world has all of its future ahead of us. It's a wonderful world. And if people, in general, understand technology, we can survive anything. Because with technology, we can do most anything. We can, we're running out of petroleum or fossil fuel, so we'll make it. There's coming a day when we'll be able to take a block of material and lift off ions and protons and make something else out of it. The world is just on the threshold of great advances. Now, tempering that are such things as the terrorists and the dictators around the world. But I think that all needs to be overcome with education, basic education in how we live, how the world is put together. To that end, Milton Friedman told me the other day, he's putting on a TV series of 12-hour-long shows, beginning in January, that will teach basic economics. I think there's a great movement to change people's idea that the way to progress is to take something away from those who have it and give it to the poor, which is the Washington, D.C. Concept. We have a campaign we call the Free Enterprise Crusade that my son-in-law devised. John Hendricks has a campaign going with a man out lecturing that explains this. Now, it's true we haven't been able to get a very big audience to worldwide, countrywide, to hear the story, but enough key people are hearing it so that when the politicians say something that's radically wrong, there'll be enough influential people who tell them why they're wrong, you see. So, to answer your question, I'm an optimist, tempered with the need for educating the masses of people that the thing that made America great was individual freedom, the free market system, and immense productivity that resulted from that freedom. And yet Washington is whittling away at the freedom, and consequently whittling away at the production, starting with petroleum or anything you name. The automobile industry has been whittled away because Washington has the concept that they can run it better if they put their hand in having converters put on the car that costs $200 more.
I grew up in a remarkable transition period. I started going to school with a team of horses. We didn't have enough money to have a car. Ultimately, I had a car. And then all of a sudden, airplanes, and then jet airplanes, and then television, and all this happened.
It's all come too fast to absorb.
Yeah, and it's because of what you do, really, and that's great. And taking the next 50 years, because I'm 50, what more is going to happen? Do you see?
Well, we're not going to see tremendous new overnight discoveries. We're not going to invent the submarine or the telephone. We're going to refine all those things. But what's going to happen is that the world is going to industrialize. They've found out in Singapore that to raise their standard of living, they've got to make things, make them better and cheaper than anybody else. They found out that in Brazil. They found it out all around the world in the so-called underdeveloped countries. They found that out, and they're doing it. As the world industrializes, such as China, it's just beginning. It has realized, China realizes that they have to produce things with machinery, not with their hands. With China producing something that's better, instead of bicycles, they'll have something more. They'll have their own televisions. They'll have their own washing machines, things they don't dream of having now. And as they get those things, and as they produce, they're going to have more freedom. Freedom can come with a prosperous economy. Already in China, they're having inducements, incentives. And no longer does everybody have to be at the same level. So this is a tremendous, great trend for the next 50 years, is that the world will get better by way of producing more and better goods in their own places. And that's the hope of the future. But along with that, they have to understand that in order to produce at the maximum rate, they have to have individual freedom. If not completely at first, at least start with it. Does that answer your question?
Sure. I want to ask one more. Do you see any new mechanisms coming on, like with television and system of communications or the jet age? Do you see any new innovations that way in the next 50
I think there'll be a lot in chemistry.
in chemistry?
Yeah.
And synthetic fuels and things like
yeah.
that, like you're doing?
Yeah. And making things. We already have man-made metals, tungsten carbide, for instance. We now are producing cutting tools over at our tool factory that are made of little tiny pellets of steel that are pressed together. It's called powdered metallurgy. It's a new concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder and better than any other steel that's ever been made. Those are the directions we can go in. I don't see any great new discoveries that are going to change the basic direction we're going in.
What do you think of the educational system we have now in this country? Do you think it's keeping up? Or?
Well, we have some marvelous universities. We have some great collection of knowledge. I go back to the feeling that the professors who teach the humanities, as they call them, or teach economics, should be sent back to the trade school so they know what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. I sometimes think that too.
Yeah. That's the big flaw in the educational system is the
The
teachers
basics aren't there.
That's right.
So we found that out.
Yeah.
That's why we did what we did. Our little company can make TV shows, and we can touch quite a few people because we make them. What would you think would be the best thing we could make in television?
A series on basic economics, and we'll help you do it. I think that's so tremendously important. But first, let me say that in this movement toward industrializing the world, you can come in with a tremendous contribution, because here you can give them a picture of each segment of technology that they can get in a hurry, that anybody can get in any language, in China. And it will give a great surge to the progress of industrializing.
Can you structure basic economics for me? What you mean by that?
Well, you know, the one sentence definition is that there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
Well, I think
it's reoccurred in our discussion here, and obviously very important to you.
It's important to every living person on the planet to know that there's a formula for how we live. It's natural resources, which are there, plus human energy, either mental or muscular, multiplied by tools. And the only variable in that equation is tools. Now, tools, not just those you see out in our Hall of Progress, but everything that is under the heading of capital goods is tools. I mean, a telephone is a tool. People have to understand that, and you could teach that in your series and put it right along with the kit you send to China, so that everybody there knows that that's the basic formula that will never vary. To produce things, you have natural resources plus human energy, but multiplied by tools, and that's the important one, tools. That's, in a nutshell, what I'm talking about, the essence of economics.